and...
Kings of the earth. I saw the noise of thunder east from the earth. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him.
Hello and welcome to Declarations of War. This is the milestone episode 300. I am your host, Alexei of Card. This is EVE's longest-running podcast, reaching back into the annals of EVE history to walk you through our journey and the important milestones and figures of the game. In these 300 episodes, we've been casting it, and of course the years immediately preceding the start of the show in 2010. And as always, we'll be discussing PvP and politics with a mercenary perspective, but here to give that perspective, along with my usual co-hosts of Zeeroak Ool.
Hello.
And Levitain, who is muted.
What? Never. G'day.
Our special guest, multiple-time CSM, multiple-time Black Mark Award winner for the best guest, and of course, an overall EVE podcasting legend, the man who needs no introduction but always gets one anyway, Brisc Rubal.
I have it on good authority. No one remembers me anymore. So this is my big comeback show, everybody. I'm glad to be back on Declarations of War.
Have you finally faded into obscurity?
I hope so. I hope they've all forgotten me. But we'll find out.
Well, if there's a right to be forgotten, no one earns it more than you do, Brisc.
Ha!
I appreciate you coming out. I also appreciate our sponsors. As you know, if you've been listening to the show for the past couple weeks, we've had multiple sponsors on the show, which is really the first time that's happened. Usually we get a run of one sponsor, and they kind of end, and we'll get another one, and that can kind of end. Wait a bit, we'll get another one. We've had 3 very generous, long-term supporting sponsors, and this being such a milestone show, I wanted to credit all of them. So audience, we have a dynamite show coming up for you. The history of Noir will be discussed, and the hosts will battle it out for the most impactful alliances, FCs, and patches of each of EVE's decades. But before we do, an alliance which just went through a battle of wills, the Sons of Bane, a null-block alliance formerly from the Winter Coalition under the oppressive thumb of fraternity, has cast those shackles aside and has bravely pilgrimaged from Geminate down south to join the Imperium, which is, of course...
We're so proud of them, aren't we? It's wonderful when groups finally realize how horrible it is to be on the bad guys' team.
Now firmly in the side of the good guys, a formerly NPC Null alliance, they've since evolved into a pretty thriving 1,200-man, pretty solid crew. We've talked about them a couple times in the show. They have one of the best defense fleets in Winterco, so that'll be a nice +1 for Imperium to have. And for their members, they offer lucrative options to Corps, and, whether you're a PV player or an indie mining corp, they've got a lot of opportunities for you, and I imagine those opportunities will only explode even further under the Imperium's magnanimous rule. So if you're looking to PvP and you want to be a part of something great, reach out to Sons of Bane. But they're not the only alliance that's had this show's back. Of course, there's another one out there. Do you like violence against Ishtars? I think we all do here.
Who doesn't like violence against Ishtars? I mean, come on.
Well, if you're fanatical about your hatred, and you're fanatical about your love for the Zealot, I've got to tell you, you got to join the Zealots. They were formerly formed in Faith Abalis. They have since spread their wings, and they're looking for people who are battle-hardened and want to find their salvation through glory and destruction. Reach out to Sergeant Felix, that's SJT space FELIX, or join their public chat Zealots Pub to arrange your indoctrination? Who said that? And entrain your education into this perfectly legitimate and harmless religious social club that will absolutely enrich your life.
Ali, I have to say, I love the fact that you pronounce Zealots correctly, because I spent years in it, and Dark Shines, we had a Zealot doctrine, but he pronounced it Zealots. So in the back of my head, every time you say Zealot, I'm thinking Zealot. And no, you said it right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
When I must have said it that way at one point. Trying to think back.
Zealots.
I'd like to think us British are rubbing off on you, Alec, teaching you the proper way to speak English.
There
That
you
would
go.
be called the Z-Lot, and no one's here for that.
Oh.
But speaking of enriching, our third sponsor, the double trillionaire Crota, author of Markets for ISK blog. Would you like to be at least a single trillionaire? Probably
That would
start
be
listening
awesome.
to guys like
I
Crota.
kind of need to do that.
You may also know him from the Oz Tank and a frequent guest on Oz's content. One of the top economic minds in the game. Follow him at Markets for ISK blog. And, get your finances sorted out.
One ISK your way to trillions.
And it's 2025 right now. When it comes to 2030, are you still going to be broke? It's probably because you didn't
Yes.
subscribe to that blog.
That's probably true.
Yeah, gotta get on that, Brisc.
I'm bad. I'm really bad. I'm the worst economics player in this game. All I do
No,
is give
that
away
can't
my
be
money.
true.
I never make a dime.
I'm the brokest bitter vet I know, and have been for the entirety of my EVE career. I can't be
I hear
bothered
you.
to do PI. I can't remember the last time I ran a mission. PvEing to me is like shooting a battleship when I land at a belt and no one's there for me to tackle them, and then I warp away and keep trying.
It's
It's about as much as happens.
killing gate rats. That's my ratting. That's what I do.
Well, they started it, usually.
Right. That's what they get for being on a gate. Get the hell out of here. You don't belong
Get out
here.
of here!
Scram, kid. You bother me.
Can't come around this neighborhood no more.
Mhm.
Well, speaking
Now
of being
yous can't.
bad, as listeners will know, Noir is one of the worst corps in the game. We're terrible. We've been dying for, I don't know, almost 15 years now. Just waiting for the time to finally put the nail in the coffin of Eve's longest-running, most decorated, and most feared, perhaps, mercenary corporation in the game. And, there's been a popular question that I get asked. I've been asked this several times over the past few years. You know, we hear you talk a lot about what Noir does now, but I don't know the history of it. Especially folks that have come into the game and started listening to the show in the past couple of years. We haven't really talked about the start of the Corp or, things forming up, the different eras and different alliances we were in. We talk about some of the legendary contracts, but a lot of people wanted to know more about that. Unfortunately, I've been living the Noir life in EVE for so long that I wouldn't even really know where to begin. So I have recruited Brisc here to flip the script and actually interview me on this show and interview Zero and Lave for their time at Noir as well. So we can talk about the history of Noir and its intrinsic link to the show in a lot of ways. And I guess I'll just throw it over to Brisc and see where he wants to get going.
Thank you, Alec. And it's wonderful to be on the show today. And now that I get to take over, you guys can listen to me talk and act like this is like the meta show back when I did the meta show. But anyway, welcome to Declarations of War, episode 300. I am your semi-host, Brisc Rubal, here to interview Alec and the boys here about Noir's history. Now, I have to say, I appreciate the fact that Alec himself does not know how old Noir is. Because if you just heard him say, he said, we're like almost 15 years old. No, sir, you are not just almost 15 years old. And I want to start from the very beginning. And that beginning is 17 and a half years ago, by the way.
Oh my
Take
gosh.
me back, Alec. Take me back. You started playing the game in 2006. Noir was founded on January the 17th, 2008. That's more than 17 years ago. Tell me what was going through your head the day you pushed Form Corporation and founded Noir.
Okay. A few months ago, just prior to the Christmas break and kind of the holiday season of that year, I had a falling out with the corporation that I'd been in since I'd started the game.
The Royal Guard?
The Royal Guard, that's right.
I did my homework, as you can tell.
Oh, I guess so prepared. Whew.
There you go.
Shivers.
What was the falling out over? I'm curious to hear about this because this sounds like a story.
So Royal Guard they were kind of a casual friends corp, which I've heard a lot of EVE corporations are like this. You're not really there to do a specific thing in the game. You're a corporation because you've had a prior relationship with the people involved, and you're kind of there to do whatever they're down to do. I had made relationships with them in a game called Matrix Online. It was a ton of fun. It was my first multiplayer online game experience, certainly in a MMORPG context. That game was kind of dying down. Everyone was talking about what game are we going to go to next. EVE got thrown out there. I took a look at it. Oh, I love Star Trek and spaceships. This is kind of cool. I don't need a credit card to at least try it. I can download it and create a character and play a couple days for free. Sounds great. I'm in college, so free is good. Rolled the dice on it, and a couple of the other guys also started getting active. We had one player who was a super vet. He'd been playing for years, and he kind of was our guide stone. We all followed his lead. But then, toward the end of my time there, he was kind of AFK, and I got a better sense of what I did want to do in the game, and no one else really wanted to do that with me, and I got really frustrated that, we're trying to get involved in these nullsec fights and trying to impress the nullsec landowners to let us have a little tiny chunk of space all to ourselves. And me and a few other guys were working really hard to do it, and we were getting no support from anybody. It was taking up a lot of time to argue about whether we should contribute to PvP or not, or we need to do more mining ops and less PvP ops. I don't really want to mine. And I finally got fed up with it. I said, all right, you know what? I'm going to try EVE on my own. I joined a Mercenary Corporation because I loved the idea of getting paid to PvP. So that's what I really love to do. I was sick of running missions. I was sick of ratting in belts. I didn't want to do that anymore. But I still needed ISK. How do I get ISK without doing that stuff? Can I do it with just PvP? Well, let me at least try. I found a Mercenary Corporation. I joined them just as they were joining.
The Final Stand, I believe, was the name of that one.
Yep, The Final Stand. They were a brand new join to Divine Intervention, which if you're an old school EVE player, you might recognize as one of the early mercs around the MC era. But they were way smaller. It was like an alliance of less than 150 people. But I had the most fun. More fun in those 2 or 3 weeks than I had in the whole rest of my EVE career, practically. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I want to do this. And then the Final Stand decided they didn't want to do that anymore. They wanted to go pirate again. And I'm like, oh, well, Divine Intervention. Can I join the main corp? Sure, but you have to pay, I forget how much it was, $40, $50 out of pocket as a joining fee. Well, that's dumb. I ain't doing that.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are high-sec dwellers, let me give you a nickel's worth of free advice. If anybody says you have to pay to join a corporation, that's a scam.
Yeah.
Keep it going.
100%.
Real life money or ISK, it doesn't matter. It's still a scam.
I just wasn't going to do that, especially because I was one of their top killers at the time. It's
talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater and getting one of your best players to walk away.
As a
to make
CEO
$50
now, as a CEO
okay.
now, it's insane to me that you would do that.
Zero Lev, have any of you guys had to pay to join a corporation? I hope not.
Quite the opposite. Most corps will just throw stuff at you, of course.
Right.
Oh, this is a whole different paradigm back then.
It's weird. It's weird because, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit when we talk about the different eras of EVE. But it's funny how different the game was when guys like Alec and I started way back in 2006 and earlier. Lev, when did you start the game?
So I started the game I think a few years after Alec, if I remember correctly. It's about could be 8, 10. I don't know. My first corporation was a mining kind of corporation, bit of a PvE, bit of a Care Bear. We got dunked on a couple of times, and Lave of this day would have just come along and just completely trashed whoever it was there back then. But I hadn't a clue back then, and eventually decided to kind of branch out into PvP, doing a bit of low-sec stuff. Stumbled across a group called Noir that were advertising and said, yeah, we're pretty professional on this. And I was like, yeah, all right, I can try that. I was terrified actually because I thought I wouldn't get in. Like I'd heard a lot about this group. They just had these really insane kind of joining requirements. I was like, okay, well, I'll just go in and I'll go in and do a job, and yeah, somehow kind of stuck it there. And I think my corporation history is about 3 times as long as Alex. I've kind of bounced and flipped in through different corps and tried lots of different things in my time itself. This is like my 3rd or 4th time in Noir itself, but. Yeah, I started as a cab. I was a miner in the day. I had Exhumus 5 before I had Cruiser 5 and all the kind of specialization itself. I know. But back then I was on a character, and then I made my PvP alt, which became my alias Levitain, and the rest, as they say, is history and several thousand pods later.
There you go. Zero, when did you get started?
2020 for me. I'd heard about Eve for probably a decade prior to that. A friend of mine was really into his nerdy space games more than I was. You know, he backed Elite Dangerous when it got announced and things like this. And one day I was watching him play Eve. He just dabbled back into it for a sec during the 2020 era, should we say, and I watched it with my eyes for the first time instead of just listening to him talk about it. And it was so obscure, you know, this idea of different security, space, and
Internet spaceships.
It didn't make any sense to me until I could see it with my own eyes. And I said to him, "Oh, it's a board game in space. You have, you know, a chance to hit
Basically.
and things like this." Yeah. And I said, "Wow!" And I downloaded it, and yeah, I kind of have played almost consistently since, but still consider myself new 5 years on.
It's okay. I've been playing the game for 19 years, and I still feel like I'm new in a variety of ways, because there's still stuff that I find out. Like, I learn random stuff all the time just by hanging out with guys in the Corp who know more than me, which is quite a few, as amazing as it sounds. But I have to say, I appreciate the fact we've got pretty much all of the major generations of Eve player in the chat right now. We've got Alec and I, the old school, old guard guys. Lev coming in 2010, like at the height, like the golden era, that era period, and then Zero getting in here at the end, like the end of the big nullsec war, the last whatever you want to call it, World War B2 or Vietnam or whatever you want to call it, and that's the various different eras of the game, really. And I think we'll get back to that when we talk about the different eras of Eve and the best corps and best alliances and all that kind of stuff in a little bit of the rest of the show. But I want to get back to
speaking
Noir's
of the best alliances, so when I left, I was like, well, I'm not paying $50. That's insanity. I wanted to be a mercenary. What was the first name you think of for mercenaries back in those days? MC.
Right.
I gotta join a corporate MC. Wouldn't you know, Tortuga was announced like 3 days before I started looking, and they were like, "Wow, your Killboard looks great, but we're not accepting anybody right now because we're worried about spies, so recruitment's closed." I was like, all right, well, if no one else is gonna do this right now, and it didn't seem like anyone not involved in Tortuga was doing mercenary stuff that was worth anything. Sorry to Repo and all those guys. Weren't on my radar at the time, because I wasn't really thinking about high sec. I said, well, I'll just start my own, and I'll start my own corp with the premise of why I wanted to join a corp in the first place. I want to grow my wallet with PvP, so unlike any other mercenary corporation at the time, including MC, my big concept was, when I get money for the mercenary contracts, I'm going to pay the players directly, instead of keeping it for the corporation, like buying stuff with or putting into what would later become the SRP fund, but before those were a thing. Like, I'm not going to put stuff in hangars. I'm just going to make my members rich, and they're going to buy their stuff. And that's going to be like the big unique hook that helps me separate myself out from all these other PvP corps that I see. And after that, we were off to the races.
So how many folks were with you when you started the Corp back in 2008?
No one.
Just you?
Yeah.
So how did you go from just you to being a Corp with hundreds of members?
I'll tell you, I didn't have any crazy joining requirements, that's for sure.
You didn't charge anybody $50 to join.
I did not.
That helps.
After fending off multiple recruitment attempts and merge requests from everyone in the recruitment channel, I managed to talk 2 people into joining. We already had one contract under our belt. I took a contract from my former alliance. Needed some help keeping a POS's defenses from being repaired. That was our first job. I camped their pass with a stealth bomber for like 6 hours one night. And I was just kept my eye on it on my laptop, and then every time they poked their little heads out to try to repair one of the gun batteries, I fucking killed them. And,
How many
yeah.
nasty comments did you get in local that day?
Oh, they were quite frustrated. I think they expected me to go AFK, which you would, and I probably would nowadays. But back in those days, I had all the attention span and time in the world. Just like doing my homework, keeping an eye every couple minutes, just looking
That's
up.
it.
Yeah, it was wild
The good
stuff.
old days before we got all those responsibilities and jobs and things, and can't play the game 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I always laugh because when I was on the CSM, we would always talk about player habits and different types of things. And the incessant fighting against bots has been a standard issue forever. And the problem is, EVE players kind of play this game like bots sometimes, not going to lie. Like, there will be guys that will sit and will mine for 18-hour stretches without doing anything but that. And they look like bots. And it's hard to, like, and that's, I always tell my friends when they're like, oh, we found a bot. I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure it's not just, a regular EVE player being an EVE player? Because we kind of do weird stuff like that. And I think that's kind of funny. So you started off one guy, soon you're 3. Tell me how it expanded. Tell me what happened next in the story of Noir.
It's a little hazy. At some point, I grew it to like, I want to say 7 to 10. No, it couldn't have been 10. It was less than 10 people, somewhere between 5 and 10 people. Just like relentlessly hitting the recruitment forums pretty much every day. And at that point, I was like, man, I'm getting a little frustrated because it was a hard grind to get those initial members. And we were still at the point where it was hard to get more than a few people on at the same time on a given day. Just when you got a group that small, that's kind of how it is. So I'm like, what can I do to get the Alliance to the next level, or the Corporation to the next level? I really want us to be good at this stuff. So I reached out to another mercenary corporation that had made their name around that time called Trinity Nova. And I actually paid them for a training contract. It's like, hey, we're another mercenary corporation. We probably suck compared to you because everyone's talking about how great you guys are. Scrim against us a couple times a week, like teach us some stuff. We wound up beating in most of the scrims. And their executor was like, I really don't feel too good about taking your money. You guys didn't really need to learn that much from us. In fact, would you like to join the Alliance right now? I said, well, why, yes, I would. And that's when we joined Trinity Nova, and we really took off from there. That was, once we had more activity, more players to like help us fill fleets out, and we had a little bit of credibility from their name, tons of people wanted to join.
And so you guys stayed with Trinity Nova for about 6 months or so. And then you made the jump, amazingly enough, to WEDOT, which we'll talk about in a second. So tell me a little bit about how that went down.
That was actually a contract.
So you had that was a contract, okay.
WEDOT, back in the day, was desperate for activity and really wanted us to work with them, and we couldn't get standings in either way, and they really wanted us to appear under their Alliance banner doing stuff to help it make their Alliance look a little better. So they hired us to join direct.
Which is funny, given what happens to WEDOT later. So, for those of you who who live in high sec, and I use that as my joke about people that aren't paying too much attention to EVE, they live in high sec. Anyway, for those of you who live in high sec, Wildly Inappropriate, aka WEDOT, is one of the older storied alliances in the game. They are most famous now because this was one of the first times that this had ever happened, where a alliance-sized group decided they didn't want to be an alliance anymore and turned themselves into a corporation and then joined another alliance as a corporation in that alliance. And of course, they joined Goonswarm. So we have a phrase for this, which we use in the Imperium now, which is if you're in an alliance, you want to go into a corp and then come into Goons, we call it WEDOTting, because that's what That was their ticker, WI dot. So wildly inappropriate dot. WEDOT.
It's like Skyping or a Q-tip. They became a verb.
Exactly. They became a verb, like AWOXing. You know, it became a thing. And so every time I hear WEDOT, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know what that means. Those guys, they were an alliance, and then they became a corporation. So you get out of the WEDOT contract, and then it happens. Then the Noir mercenary group is formed.
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
At that point, Trinity Nova still had good pilots, but their leadership was going inactive, and their core corporation was largely inactive. So our group, which had been growing and was super active, quickly eclipsed them and led to some hurt feelings among some of their now inactive directors. And basically it got to the point where their leadership was so AFK I couldn't manage standings, which means we really couldn't do contracts anymore, not effectively. So it was a hard decision, but I said ultimately we've got to leave Trinity Nova behind. I think we picked up a handful of players that were still active, struck out on our own. There was the WEDOT contract, and then when it came back, we didn't have an alliance to go to. At the time, there were advantages to being in an alliance period for war decks, because you could war deck faster. You didn't need to do a shareholder vote. I was like, well, we're not rich, but we're not short on money. A billion-esque seems like a really convenient, like it's worth the convenience to do that. And who knows, we're like one of the only mercenary names in town at the moment, because I think MC at that point had been either was inactive or was about to become inactive, and PL was like out of the price range of most people. And we were the number 3 now that Trinity Nova had faded. So I'm like, all right, well, maybe we'll do our own alliance. We'll get the war decks faster. And who knows, maybe we'll have some corporations join us. They very rarely did. But, that was the theory at the time.
And that was right around the time you guys started Noir Academy, right?
It would have been before, but I'm probably around that time, yeah.
So tell me about that, because, when it comes to EVE and the way that many alliances started picking up new players and training them, a lot of people would say, oh, just go to EVE University, or you had Brave Newbies or some of these other groups, but this is way before those groups were even a thing. Where'd you guys get the idea to set up an academy?
Kind of frustration with EVE Uni, actually, in some ways, because the folks that are newer to the game, or live in high-sec, as you'd say.
Live in high-sec.
Way back in these days, this was like pre-Wormhole Campus, pre-Nullsec Campus. It was hard to imagine a player group more averse to PvP at scale than EVE University. They were so against it, they ran CSM candidates on the premise that the war deck system should be either dismantled or severely curtailed because they didn't want to get attacked in high-sec.
I remember this. I remember seeing this.
That is like how PvP allergic they were. So obviously, if you're joining that group and you're coming up through that culture, unless you're a naturally bloodthirsty player, yeah, exactly. You would become the cultural norm of what you see around you. And you definitely wouldn't pick up the skills to do it very well. So you're like, well, if we see newer players, and this was at the time, the elite PvP corporation was a real thing and not a joke. We didn't want to have these newer players come in and dilute our fleets and take all these losses that would kind of ruin our kill board or ruin our reputation. But we still want them to have a better experience than EVE University. And I think this might have even been pre-Red vs. Blue. So I'm like, well, what can we do with them? Why don't we create another corporation to put them in, and we'll work with them, but they won't show up on our kill boards as losses, so they can make as many mistakes as they want.
And at that point, I want to just bring up, because for many of you who are listening to the podcast who have been around recently, or someone like Zero who started in 2020, back then, people paying attention to kill boards was a big deal. People would get kicked from these organizations if they had a big loss. You lose a capital ship, and it's not on a combat op where you were approved for it, you're gone. You were just gone. And many of these organizations, while they wouldn't say you have to pay us to join, they had skill point requirements for characters. And if you didn't have a character with either a killboard that looked like you knew how to PvP, or the skill points necessary to be, or even they would give a list of doctrines that you had to be able to fly in order to join. And if you could not, they wouldn't even take you. And that was PL for the longest time, having skill point requirements and things like that. And other groups were the same way. So for those who were trying to break in, who were trying to do things, there wasn't a lot of options if you wanted to get into the elite PvP crowd. But Noir was one of those groups that you could, because they had Noir Academy, which lets you get in there and do that, which I thought that was a great model. And I know down the road, many nullsec organizations and others, lowsec as well, have adopted that model, and either the main corp is newbie friendly, or they have. There was a group called Initiative Associates, Initiative Mercenaries, and Initiative when I was in there, that you would put people into, train them up, teach them, get them, and when they were ready to go, they brought them in the main group. Yeah. But it kept them separated, and it was clear, all right, these guys are the new up-and-coming guys. And you had classes, and you trained them, and you gave them free ships, and it was a great way to get people integrated into the game. And I appreciate the fact that Noir did that.
We definitely weren't the first.
You weren't, but you guys were.
I got the idea from somebody.
Yeah, but I mean, you guys were doing it, and doing it well for a while, which I appreciate. Plus, this is your history, so I'm tired of talking nice about you. Come on.
You know what I think we may have been, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments or something, but we may have been the first small gang PvP group to do it. So I know some of the larger alliances were definitely, if they weren't doing it, they were at least experimenting with it. And I know there were dedicated groups like Agony Unleashed that were kind of getting popular around then. But there was no, like there wasn't a veto academy. Like, that wasn't a thing yet. There weren't other small gang corporations that had training corps yet. So I think that if we were going to look for firsts or areas where we innovated, that was probably it.
RVB was probably the one I think I remember most of itself. Just like, if you wanted to just have a fight at perma war with someone, that was great. And if anyone ever started on red, they'd go down and try and do it on purple and go and kick your ass.
Yeah, but there was no, if you joined RVB, you were doing it to join RVB. There was no next step in that journey. It wasn't like you were joining Sneg Wafa to try to join Sneg, or join Pandemic Horde to eventually join Pandemic Legion. But you're right, RVB was cool, and I'm happy we got to be involved in several red versus blue contracts, sometimes fighting on one side or the other, sometimes fighting both of them at the same time.
So over the next few years, I mean, basically from 2009 until 2014 or so, you guys were actively taking mercenary contracts, going out and fighting. What are some of the memories you have from that time period up to 2014? Any of the big contracts that you can recall?
Querious is one that sticks in my mind. I think we had a deep Querious deployment. This was well before Imperium had even gone near that area, and it was very much in the day of live out your ship. You had your ship. There was no mobile depots. There was no Astor houses. There was no wormholes. I don't think at that time anyway. It was just get out there, live in your ship. You'd be in your Vagabond, or you'd be in your Stiletto or whatnot. Oh boy, and this is before Marauders were absolute kind of powerhouses. And I think we just set that entire region ablaze. It was glorious. It was probably some of the best memories I had in Noir at that time. It was one of the biggest contracts I was involved on itself from that point. I was just like, yeah, this is good, isn't it? This is really good.
Yeah. Oh, Querious. That one was great. We had a couple contracts like that where we deployed deep into null security and just couldn't go back to high sec. Either the wormholes weren't part of the game yet, or they were there, but it was just inconvenient. But very key, there was no place to dock, and you couldn't really throw down a POS because it would get killed immediately, and you'd lose all your stuff. So you had to figure out a way to pick one ship per player. And this is like pre-multi-boxing, really. The folks that could do it could maybe do one extra account, and that was like, ooh, your computer can do that. So it was pretty much one ship per pilot. So forget about countering doctrines or having a roaming ship and a brawling ship and a this ship and a that ship. Nah, it was you and your Vagabond. There are many Vagabonds like it, but this one is mine.
There you go. The Swiss Army knife of mercenary ships of the day. Yep.
Yep, it was Vagas, it was Rapiers, it was Interceptors, a lot of stealth bombers. I can remember before stealth bombers had torpedoes and they had cruise missiles instead. But they were just a really effective combo because back in the day, battleships, T1 battleships, were the ratting ship of choice. Faction was way too expensive, hacks were way too expensive, or pilots didn't have the skill points for them. And the Myrmidon and the Drake had either not been out or just come out, so they were still kind of expensive. People didn't really know what to do with them yet. So Dominixes were the thing. You'd see some Megathrons, the occasional Lamar battleship, Ravens, super popular.
Ravens.
So our
that was
killer
the
combo,
first ship I got into.
Oh yeah, I mean they were great for what they were, but they were also really vulnerable to small ships. So our combo was to have an interceptor do the hunter killing, fly around a pocket or around a region or whatever, pin a target down for several stealth bombers that were gating behind it, because this is pre-Black Ops, so you had to do it the long way. And they would hold the battleship down. It would be effectively helpless. It would try to nude us off, but really couldn't. It would try for drones, but people didn't have a lot of SP for drones back then. So 1 or 2 interceptors guaranteed to hold a ship down, and then you'd drop 1 or 2 stealth bombers on them at range and just shell them to death. Rinse and repeat that, sometimes with a mobile warp disruptor bubble, sometimes just catching them in a belt. And yeah, to the tune of billions of ISK for a really small group. And back in those days, those billions went a lot further than they do today. But best contract that pulled that, plus everything else I love about Mercwork, would be the Providence contract around 2009, 2010. We got hired by AAA for several Providence contracts, kind of close together. Our goal was kill everything in this half of Providence. They assigned us a dividing line. Our alliance is going to take this bit and do structure shooting. You guys take this bit, soften them up for when we get there. Sure. AAA used this a lot back in the day because they had a really positive first experience with us, and they had a lot of money but not a lot of pilots, which is a good combination for mercs. I said, all right, cool. Anything else? Yeah, generally we want you to demoralize their coalition, so anything you can think of that would do that. Okay. We found a way to set up an internet radio station, and it would play a lot of the Matrix soundtrack and rebel reggae stuff. And every time we'd kill somebody, we'd post that link, and then we'd be you should really ask such and such diplomat about why you died, or why this is happening to you. And we just kept doing it. It was relentless. And the kills were so crazy, we couldn't go 5 jumps without having over an hour's worth of content. Just running into new ships or fleets to fight, having scouts front and back, because we'd have targets traveling constantly, trying to escape or trying to do whatever, pretending a war wasn't happening and keeping going about their business. We killed so much, AAA's line members started complaining to the leadership that they didn't have any more targets. And eventually we flipped, I want to say, the 4th largest alliance in CVA's block, from their block to AAA's block to actively attack them, because we were just feeding them so much propaganda.
That is glorious. That's how you do it. That's part of the fun. And as one propagandist to another, I appreciate that a lot.
We've never been able to replicate that, but that was just a magical moment for that everything felt like it came together. And we got some space after that, which was a lot of fun.
Lev, were you around for that?
Huh?
Was Lev around for that? Were you around for that?
Yeah, I was around. I was around for that itself. I remember we had an Australian member, Arcantentrix, who just used to permacamp R3, the entrance into that, and good God, I think he just feasted at that gate for several years, he'd just be like, I've got this guy. He was a prominent multi-boxer, kind of really showing us how it was done with a Sabre and a DPS with a Falcon at 150 kilometers away, just jamming out the target. This is back in the day where one Falcon just ruined your day and you couldn't do anything.
And,
I hate EUR in general, but I hate Falcons in particular.
You couldn't even lock the Falcon back then.
Yeah, and this isn't the day as well for people who weren't around in Eve. there were very few, if any, Titans. There were no jump bridges. There were no Black Ops. There were no wormholes. There were no boosters. There were no nothing. Everything was gate to gate, point to point itself. And we just ran nano. Because we were really fast between them, we'd just catch people, as Alex said, who had no right to be there. Like these days, you'd be like, well, why are you gating like a Dominic's 4 jumps there? Just use a bridge. But no, they'd gate it and they'd run in, and suddenly they'd a couple of scepters pin them down either side of the gate, and a bunch of vagabonds descend upon them.
And they didn't have eyes back then because they weren't multi-boxing. It was just one account. So you were every time you jumped the gate, you were taking your life into your own hands, hoping that on the other side there wasn't going to be a camp or a bunch of Noir guys ready to nooch out. So.
Yep, and we were moving so fast, their intel channels had a hard time keeping up. They would we heard this secondhand from people, but they would often report us in the wrong place. So people would think they were safe doing jumps or making a quick little trip. But actually, we'd already moved the camp 5 jumps. And they were just like screwed. They had no recourse for it. They even tried to put up some defense fleets, but they weren't very coordinated because all the good PvPers were on the other side of the region defending against AAA. So we cut their reserves to ribbons. They had no safe place to rat, no safe place for R&R except retreating back to HighSec, which absolutely tanked their morale.
So moving on, obviously, you guys were in Black Legion for a couple months. That was clearly a contract. I think I see you on similar spaceships as well. Was that not a contract, or was that you guys actually joining? Tell me about that then, because that's interesting that you guys were in BL. Was that for the war?
I don't remember it being for any particular thing. I don't know if you remember it differently. I think we just joined to join because we wanted to. I was getting a little sick, and sometimes this happens cyclically, of like being a small alliance. It's a pretty hard grind, and I saw BL as kind of like a proto-PL, but with a better culture that like maybe we could live with, and it would give us access to the more pilots and bigger fleets. And Elo Knight was a pretty prominent FC figure at the time, so it was exciting to be able to fly with him. So hopped in and did that. We managed to catch the Battle of Asakai under Black Legion's banner, which was a ton of fun. But ultimately, Elo Knight just went away, went AFK, and the culture of the Alliance was such that you could not get a fleet together without him, no matter who was trying to FC it. And if it became apparent that he had no plans to come back anytime soon. So I was like, well, this was nice, but this is clearly not going to work. So pulled the plug as soon as that situation became apparent.
And again, that's another thing we'll talk about later in the show, although I got to speed this up because we've been talking about Noir for a long time. The bottom line is there are a lot of organizations in this game that are built around 1 or 2 people. And quite often, if those 1 or 2 people decide to, as we like to say in Karma Fleet, go out and get cigarettes, and they don't come back, then the groups tend to fall apart. And that has happened. It happened with Atlas Alliance. It happened with Black Legion multiple times. And then, of course, there are some of these organizations that have withstood multiple leadership changes over the years, like Goon Swarm and PL and others. So it's just interesting how different groups are organized in different ways. But let me fast forward you guys to the Mercenary Coalition days. Tell me about what it was like when you guys were in MC, because that seems to be the longest group that you were in that was not Noir itself or run by Noir.
MC was great for as long as it lasted, but what's the phrase from Bane? Victory defeated you. We got involved in World War B, and it was a ton of fun until it ended. And yeah, So MC, it started off great. We had an initial pairing with them before we joined, and it was clear we were going to work well together. I was friends with Celine from the CSM, and I'd always looked up to him as a player because he was the CEO of the biggest, the most prominent mercenary alliance the game had ever seen with the best reputation. And I was like, wow, this dude's so cool. This alliance is so cool. The timing never worked out for me in MC. I wanted to join them initially way back in the day, and who knows what my EVE career would have been like if I had. So I was like, all right, well, now the timing is lining up. This feels right. Let's do it now. Let's pull the trigger and merge us into them. And we started off with some killer nullsec contracts. I want to say, was it Paragon Soul or Faith of Ballas? One of the two. but we just shredded that region. As badly as you could without hazing all the structures directly, we just buried them. Every fleet they threw at us couldn't do shit. We were just killing them constantly. Ratters couldn't undock. Miners couldn't mine. The region was shut down. And that was like, all right, this is great. Like, let's keep doing this. There were some cracks in leadership, some frustrations with how the Alliance was running, but it's like, well, this is MC. We absolutely want to be here. I'll put up with whatever, Fast forward to World War B. It was our biggest, probably one of the biggest possible contracts you could think to get. It was like a global Eve war. We were on the attacking side. We were kind of the pre-fight force. Like, we were being deployed into the areas to soften them up for the big hits. And then, of course, the actual major fights, we were in a contributing or supporting role. And apparently we were going to get nullsec space for this.
Well, you also got very well paid, didn't you?
Well, the Alliance got very well paid.
Correct. Now, I'm going to throw in a little propaganda. I'm going to throw in a little propaganda into this because, as Alex said, he called this World War B. For those of us in the Imperium, we refer to this as the Casino War because that's where the money was coming from. And essentially, the bad guys in that war opposing us had unlimited wealth running through all of these Eve-based casinos that they had been running for a long time. And essentially, they were paying every major mercenary group on the planet to come attack us, and they did. And that's why Alec and Noir and MC were on the opposite side of us in that war. Very interesting. And so the war ends, and then what happens?
MC is promised space in tribute as part of their victory package. Now, I mentioned earlier that Noir took space in Providence. Let me tell you how Noir took space in Providence. Why didn't Turbo fuck our alliance like it did Mercenary Coalition? I told AAA, obviously, we've worked with you a ton. We're going to be your allies. You don't need to worry about us harassing your space. I'm not going to hit your structures. But I don't want to be on the blue list for you and every fucking alliance and alt corp you have. That's not worth it. So I would love to take the space you're giving us, and I'll absolutely keep it free from any alliance that would be hostile to you, because, it's going to be ours. But we don't want to do the whole block thing. And they sort of like, yeah, we respect you, we trust you, that's fine. And that was great. We got to set our own Diplo within Providence. We didn't blue any alliance we didn't want to blue. We didn't join any block war we didn't want to join, or they didn't pay us to join. I think I offered them, like, a free contract every other month or something. It's like an ongoing thank you, which was no problem for us because they always gave us good contracts. So it was like, hey, could you hit this pass? Sure, dude. No problem. Mercenary Coalition joined the winning block, moved their entire alliance into a farming pocket and tribute, surrounded by blues from sea to shining sea, weren't able to take any contracts against anyone that that block was blue with or had some kind of strategic relationship with, which, because they just beat Imperium, was the whole rest of the game except Imperium, who wasn't going to hire them because they were hostile to them. So they lost all their customers and all of the nearby available PvP targets, and no one would listen to me about what that was going to mean. I wanted to leave MC because we couldn't continue to be a mercenary corporation under those conditions. Literally zero, well, actually there was maybe one or two people, but effectively 0 people wanted to leave with me. They wanted to stay in Mercenary Coalition, and they were willing to leave Noir to do it. And at that point, it became clear that I could no longer effectively serve as the CEO. They had kind of talked amongst each other, and were like, hey, we're going to go form a new corp. So I said, all right, don't do that. You can have Noir. I gave it to my second-in-command, Delador, who I trusted. And it was really, really hard on me personally. Like, no one be embarrassed about it. It gutted me, man. It was like ripping off my own arm. But
I mean, that's hard.
I didn't want to break them up.
This was 2018. Noir was 10 years old at that point. You had poured your heart and soul into this group. And they picked MC over you. That's That hurts. That's rough.
Yeah.
So what'd you do next?
I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I reached out to some IRL friends of mine in one of the old Bob Corps, and I said, hey, I kind of need a place to crash. I've been going to your barbecue for years. Like, I know you don't really have a big number of U.S. time zone players, but your alliance might. Like, let me hop in for a little bit. And they did, and it was okay. But it became apparent that no one was really around to play the game with me, and so I could really only do soloing or PvE, which again I got bored with real fast. So I kind of like tried to figure out what I was going to do in my retirement in that time.
So then, time goes on. How do you end up back in Noir?
My retirement project was super successful. Called it Capitalist Army, and the goal was to set up Freeport trade stations in hostile nullsec space. We did the first one in Great Wildlands. Did the second one in 9UI Providence without CVA's permission. That was quite fun. And they were wildly successful. Both structures lasted way longer than they had any right to. Led to a ton of great fights, a ton of good moments. But I saw Noir die. MC died as an alliance, and it took literally every active player.
I was there for that, by the way.
Really?
Because I was in it, and we used to fight constantly with MC. We were up in, where were we? I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were the next door system from where we were.
You were pure blind.
That's right. We were in Pure Blind. And we used to take it to them all the time. And I remember the famous Dude, Where's My Keep Star was MC, where they unanchored their Keep Star, forgot to reset the timer because they were playing timer games with us because we were trying to kill it. Forgot to set the timer, and suddenly, all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, their Keep Star is in a little pod, and we ran in and scooped it. And it was hilarious. And I remember going to, and I think it's 2018, going to FanFest, or I think it was E-Vegas actually, and meeting Celine and hanging out, and they had guys wearing T-shirts with a big MC on the back that said, "Dude, where's my Keep Star?" And it was the funniest thing. And that I think at that point it was kind of one of those things. That's the type of thing when it happens that can cause a big group to fail skate, especially if they were already on their last legs, as it appeared they were at the time.
Yeah. And I don't know, Lave, I guess you're probably better positioned to talk about it, but whatever went down was so bad that I think only 3 active players from Noir remained in the game, down from, 50 to 70? It must have been at the time. Then they didn't just leave MC for another place. They quit EVE and have not come back.
Yeah.
Which happens.
Quite a few people went to different. I mean, I literally after went to different pastures to go and try different things. Corporations went in different directions. I was there for Dude, Where's My Keep Star? And I sieved at the people responsible who made that happen, because we tried to defend it, and we tried to get things organised, and they were rushing around to get it all done, and then just because we were just on the back foot. And
Syndicate, you guys were in Syndicate. That's right. I remember it.
Yeah,
I remember now.
It was the Syndicate.
We were next door.
It was a couple of jumps away from the high-sec entrance. We remember buying. Right. One of our guys nipped into the high-sec next door, bought a freighter. We kind of scouted it through the gate. It landed, and as we scooped it off, fucking stealth bomber decloaks. Here comes the Capitals. Itself was just like, all right, there we go. We're going to lose that one.
Mm-hmm.
And oh god, it was just. I was just seething at the people who had made that happen itself, and of course, I was still very much of the Noir mindset, which was, you don't lose your ship unless there's a reason to lose it itself. Like every loss has to be for a reason. High efficiency. It was kind of bred into me by a certain Alex. I have no idea who that is, but you know what I mean. And
who's that guy?
Yeah, who is that guy? Geezer. And it was disappointing. I mean, I remember going to the MC kind of the final kind of get together and me. It was one of the first kind of Eve meets I've been to and that side of things. Met a load of people, really good memories from that side of things. Great people, but it just fizzled out, and people went separate ways, and Noir went into a period of kind of inactivity from that side of things. I think I ended up leaving Noir and ended up leaving the game for quite some time until I wasn't immune to this. I disappeared from the game for a bit until I came back.
So how did you end up back in Noir, Alec? Tell us the next part of the story. And then I want to get to Zero, because he's been waiting, because we're getting into his era now. Finally, we're getting into the 2020s. Era. The Zero time.
Zero time. I had kept up with Delator IRL, and we still chat sometimes. I don't really blame him personally for the way things went down. I think he was the steward for a group of players who didn't know the consequences of what they wanted to do. Didn't realize. I could see it, but for whatever reason, I could not communicate that in a way that cut through. I don't know if it would have been possible if I had said different things or done different things. Maybe nothing would have changed their minds, I don't know. But I think about it a lot. But I never ever blamed Del. So I kept chatting with him, and I don't know. I mean, it had always been in the back of my mind, especially after about a year of not being in Noir, how much I missed it, how much I missed the people, and just everything that went with it. And I know I wouldn't be able to get the people back, but I managed to talk him into giving me the corporation back. And once I had it, all I could think about was relaunching it. So I wrapped up the Capitalist Army. I took about half of those guys, and the other half, my European half of the corporation, wanted to stay under Night Jester's leadership, who's now in Noir again. He was like, things were going really well in Great Wildlands. He's like, nah, I want to ride this out. I said, all right, cool. So I took the U.S. half of the corporation, and then I put the call out for as many of the former Noir guys as would be willing to resubscribe for Blackout. That was right around the time of the Blackout patch. I was like, oh, there's no better time to relaunch the Corp than right fucking now. This is our moment. This is going to be a renaissance for EVE and the small gang PvP community. And everybody, I had 10 or 15 guys come back, plus my half of the corporation. So we had a good solid 30, 40 guys lined up, ready to go. And then CCP pulled the plug after a week and a half, and they all left.
It was more like 2 months, by the way, and it was the longest 2 months of my life.
It didn't feel. Oh, it's the shortest 2 months of ours, for sure.
God,
it was fun at the beginning. It was fun at the beginning, but then everybody stopped logging in, and then it wasn't fun anymore.
Yeah, well, pretty much everybody that came back, maybe one or two stayed for a little while, but most of them are gone. The Capitalist Army guys stayed, and from that point on, it felt like I was back in 2007, 2008, trying to scratch and claw our way up to 15 or 20 actives to be able to field a proper 10-man fleet, which sometimes we still can't do. Depends on the time zone. But yeah, that was the struggle. I had back at square one. I've got the reputation, but we haven't done anything lately. People know our name, but we're kind of has-beens, sort of. So,
then that's when the most important thing in the 2020 era happened, and that was you recruited Zero.
That's not much of an understatement, to be honest with you.
So, Zero, tell us about how you ended up in Noir, because, I mean, obviously, you told us in the beginning how you got started playing EVE, and you were talking to some friends, and then you realized, hey, this is an actual game, and I kind of like it. How did you end up in Noir from starting EVE in 2020?
So one of the biggest dilemmas anyone faces when playing EVE is, okay, great, what do I do? This is wonderful.
What do I do next? What do I do now?
What do I do? Yeah. What do I do? So, it's a role-playing game, right, allegedly, so I'd never really played a role-playing game, not properly, but I liked the idea of mercenary type stuff. That was cool. And when I was in my first few months of EVE, I heard about Mercenary Corps of old and current. Then I stopped playing for a bit, and I came back, and it was actually listening to podcasts in the short break I took from EVE after I first started playing that drew me back in. So it was podcasts like Meta Show, Declarations of War, Pando stuff. I was doing up a van in real life and listening to these podcasts. And then one day, when I finished my van, I just went straight into the house and downloaded the Eve client again and resubbed. I spent a few months in Eve University and then decided to join Noir Academy because of the stories, you know, and that's what really drew me in. And it was, and still is, some of the most fun I've had in Eve, because that objective-based gameplay, as I like to call it, is really the root of it all. It's great blowing things up, and it's fantastic chatting with your friends and hanging out and all the fun things we do in Eve, but it's even more fun when you've got an objective to complete. And I have sampled the life of nullsec, and I do admire the scale and the commitment and dedication and organisation and skill that goes into all of that. But it's definitely a different flavour when you're doing it with 9 or 15 of your closest friends.
Something better to admire from afar than participate in, I think, for players like us.
But Alec was very generous with me. You know, he sort of gave me and other new players a chance, and after a short time of being there, you know, I was given a chance to do more and take on more responsibility and things. And you know, since then I've left and sort of made my own. In the same way that Alec, you know, wanted a specific thing in the game, I decided to form something in my own sort of image. But at the same time, you know, still have close ties with Alec, and you know, we'll probably work closer together in the future.
Now, if I recall correctly, you are a fellow Black Mark Awards winner, are you not?
Yeah, I'm very privileged to have won one. Oh, yeah, just the one. Alec and yourself, you've beaten me on that.
So there you go. We're all four of us Black Mark Award winners because we hang out on the show way too much. That's it.
The most decorated podcast in history. Really.
There you go.
All
right,
so let me wrap this up. High fives.
Well, it's always good to when you win your own awards. So let me wrap this up. So now today is 2024. Noir is going strong. You have 80 plus characters in the Alliance. You probably have, 40 or 50 regular people playing. Yeah, what's it feel like to be playing Noir in the year of our Lord 2025?
Feels real good. I think our past 2 years in general have been some of our most stable and strongest of ever, really. We joined Shadow Cartel toward the end of last year, and it's been a great transition. Hasn't been for literally everyone. Shout out to my man Graham Gold, who I miss dearly. But for the most part, I think it's been a really big net gain for us. We've learned a lot about a 1 tier up scale level of PvP that we can add to our repertoire, so not just small gang stuff, but into the medium scale fights with some cap ships. And we've done some of that. I've FC'd some of those fleets before, but not at this level and not at this kind of frequency. Not, to the point where we're taking on groups like Snuff directly instead of just trying to fly around them all the time. So it's been neat. I've learned a ton. I think the rest of us have as well. Made some good friends with some of the pilots there. But it has been a bit of a slowdown, I think, especially in the last year for mercenaries in general. There's no big... Well, maybe a year is wrong. 6 months. Because we did have 2 record-breaking contracts back-to-back at the end of last year, just before we joined Shadow Cartel. One just before and one just after. That, every record you could imagine. Largest amount of payout, most number of pilots paid out, most ISK per hour for the work that we put in. All of that was broken. And then since then, it's been some wormhole defenses and not much. The game's kind of gone quiet on us, and I feel real bad because we're in fighting form.
But that's not your problem. I mean, if I had to do a meta show right now, my topic would probably be something along the lines of, why the fuck is anybody fighting? I mean, it's kind of the point where...
No winter war.
No, there has not been a major war in EVE Online, like a major block-sized war since the end of the last one, which was 2021. It is now 2025. It has been 4 years. There have been little ones. We had the fight against Fire, and Horde and Imperium fighting against Fire, and then Fire falling apart, and then there's obviously always been skirmishes back and forth. But there hasn't been a big major block level war. It's really just been skirmishing for a while now. And that puts you guys in a tough position because the guys who are capable of paying out the big time contracts are the big groups. But if the big groups aren't fighting themselves, they certainly don't need any help. And the result then is you guys don't get those contracts anymore. So, I mean, I'm hoping that we will start to see, now that some of these changes to mining and some other things, and as well as some of the nullsec changes that have gone through, that have kind of been socialized. People understand what it's like now. We're used to the metanoxes. We're used to the skyhooks. We're used to the changes to jump gates, jump bridges, I should say, now that they've renamed them to my undying unhappiness. Now that they've walked away from CCP Seagull's idea of player-built stargates, that we're getting used to it now. Maybe we'll start seeing a war. Maybe we'll start seeing the big guys starting to do something again. I don't know.
You know what it feels like? It feels like instead of the annual winter war that we've had every year as far as I can remember, it feels like the Goonswarm relocation was that instead.
Yeah.
And no one else was like, no one fought. They just moved and that was it.
But even then, to that point, like, when you think about it, yes, Goons leaving Delve, moving to Tenerifis was like the biggest single organization move in peacetime in the history of EVE, and it was trillions and trillions and trillions of ISK, tens of thousands of ships. I mean, we were moving huge fleets through the regional gate between Querious and the rest of the south there, trying to get through there constantly, the Forteco gate, over and over and over again. And I couldn't believe we'd ever got dropped, not a single time. I was waiting for a giant cluster where we would lose like a dozen or 20 Titans or something because we got dread bombed on that gate, and it never happened. So I was kind of surprised. But the fact that we were able to do that in peacetime, it was a complete surprise to everybody. Nobody thought we would ever leave, and nobody thought we could do it. And then I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't think we could do it, and I was internal as one of the leadership guys saying, hey, this is dumb, why are we doing this? And then I have to admit, a couple months later, after it was moved and everybody was there, and we were looking at the numbers rolling in, and things were doing pretty well, I had to go to Asher with my hat in my hand, and say, I was wrong, boss, you were right. This move was a good idea. But for that,
one of the most impressive logistical accomplishments. Yeah, it's massive.
I know, and that's the thing. And I love for our GSOL guys, we call it Goonswarm Offensive Logistics, GSOL. For those guys, they knocked it out of the park. But I happen to be more in line with the Noir style of doing things. And as much as I love the idea that there are logistic feats that will go down in the history of EVE, if shit's not blowing up, I'm kind of bored with it. So I want to see dead ships. I want to see people fighting. And the fact that we're not right now, I have to say the game has been a little stale for me for the last couple of years. But I'm constantly optimistic that we will get back to the good old days. But that's how EVE has been from the beginning, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I'm thinking about it. Obviously, there's never been something at the scale of one of the largest alliances in the game moving from an entire region to several regions away. But there have been like shorter term, less drastic deployments. And usually you will see one of two things happen, sometimes both if the alliance is really unlucky. Someone will attack where they've just deployed to because their infrastructure isn't fully built out yet and there's lots of people to catch moving in. Or someone will attack where they've just left to hit whatever weaker alliance is moving in or try to take the space for themselves or farm abandoned structures or whatever the case might be. I don't think either of those really happened here.
And I think part of the reason for that, and I know we were going to go back and talk about the different eras of EVE and everything, but I'm going to skip right to what do you think is the most impactful expansion in the history of EVE Online? And I don't know what the rest of you guys think, but let me tell you, for me, the Citadel expansion was the absolute biggest game changer in EVE Online, because prior to 2016, prior to Citadel, you had passes, like Alec mentioned before, and that you could drop passes, and if you were in a big group, you could defend a pass. But for the most part, if you're a single player and you're dropping a pass, it's going to die. Even if you have your Titan in it, even if you have a big ship in it. And a lot of people had a coffin back then because they had to get a Titan, you needed to have a dedicated alt that only had Titan skills, because you couldn't skill inject. This was in the pre-skill injector period. So if you owned one of those, that was what it was for. And he sat in his Titan 24 hours a day, and that's all you used him for. And you couldn't dock him anywhere, so you had to have a POS in space. And that meant you had to be in a big enough group that could defend those POSs in space. When Citadel came out, everything changed. Everything changed. You could dock ships up. You didn't have to go through the fights to create a station. You didn't have to go through building stations was hard. You could flip them. It was not. It was just a game changer. And then when Keep Stars came out, and there was finally a place to dock a Titan, that was a huge change. Dock Supers, dock Titans, huge change to the game. Coupled with skill injectors, coupled with the ability to make a new character and then skill them into whatever you want. It started the era of multi-boxing. And it created modern nullsec, as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of high sec and a lot of low sec as well, plus wormholes. Wormholes, now you could live in wormholes in a way that you couldn't before because you had places to drop stuff. The first Keep Star ever built in the game was Fort Knox, built in a wormhole, because that's where it made the most sense to do it, and they could get away with doing it without getting blown up by any of the big guys coming after them while the thing was pretty vulnerable. And I remember back in the day when it was a big deal. When you online to Keep Star, you had these were alliance level. We would call them and in it we call it an alpha fleet. I guess the Horde would call it a gold pen. Like it's a big deal. You have to show up. Absolutely need to be there. And nowadays it's not that big a deal, but back then it was huge. And I think Citadel changed the way we play EVE Online. All of the major fights during World War II, during Vietnam, whatever, often were around Keep Star fights. And we had multiple Titan battles, almost every Titan battle that I can recall ever being involved in from 2018 on. And that was the era of the big Titan fights. Like the post-Asakai, post-BTAC-R. Once after BTAC-R, every Titan fight that happened was a Keep Star kill. It was something with a structure on grid. And that dynamic totally changed the way the game, I think, is played. And I can't always say it was for the better, because, for example, groups like MC, groups like PL, groups like Init, we used to live out of wherever we were deployed. We didn't have a home system. I mean, Init, you could say, all right, technically maybe like GTECO and Curse was Geo6 was our like home, because that's where we dumped all of our crap in the stations when we were moving somewhere else. But everybody moved around all the time, and we went where the content was. And we're very similar to the mercenary groups, and I think a lot of nullsec groups like that, where they didn't have to defend space, because who wants to defend space? We're not Bob in 2005 trying to take over all nullsec, which we can also talk about. But it's like, I just want to go where the fights are, and now I'm tied down. I have structures. They cost money. We want to defend them. We don't want to lose them. They are big ticket items that are, marquee things that you want to have to say, my corp has a Keep Star. My alliance has a Keep Star. Until it doesn't, so we got to go defend it. And that created the set piece, the set time battles, and all the types of stuff that we've seen over the last 7 years now. I guess it's 9 now that, like I said, it's been out since 2016. So I think for me, that I would have to say that Citadel was the most impactful expansion. What do you guys think? What would you argue?
So for me, I would have to cheat, because I've asked this question to Leif and Alec before, and I liked their answer, and I've thought about it a lot since. It was the Apocrypha expansion that was the answer I was given last time, mainly because of the wormholes, I believe. Now, this is way before my time, but I can't imagine EVE without wormholes. I can try to imagine it, and it's hard to imagine wormholes without structures, but just the fact that there was an EVE where there was only the main map and there was no other sort of other space is an interesting concept.
I think Apocrypha, wormholes were impactful, but also for CCP the company and the health of EVE the game. I think there's a real risk if the Apocrypha expansion wasn't as successful as it was, the game might have actually died. Because prior to that, I think we had 2 or 3 dud patches. No, not even patches, major annual expansions that were just shit. Talking walking in stations and the planetary interaction patch, which, I mean, we all love PI right now, except it's a feature that's only been touched one time this past year since it's been released. when it was initially promised, it was, oh, you're going to be able to build out these vast planetary facilities. You'll be able to sabotage other players' facilities and like pollute their water, so it would ruin their water production. It was all, ooh, this sounds really cool. I could like do PI on a hostile planet to mess with these guys that I don't like. There's all these thoughts about how it would look like, and it wound up just being a real big click fest. And players like of Zero's era and onward, I shit you not, that was the feature for the whole expansion. I'm not shitting you. There was no new, like, exciting ship line that was also in there. There was, like, no graphics upgrade. No, that was the patch. I really think if Apocrypha hadn't come along and reminded people that CCP could actually put a good patch out, that people might have lost their confidence in the game and it would have started to decline way earlier than it did. And, with a much smaller player base to drop from. But after Apocrypha, I'm going to double check my timing, Brisc, but I think that kicked off one of the golden eras of the game.
Apocrypha was 2009, and it did for the time. But I have to say, Apocrypha predated Incarna, which was the walking in stations. That's when things went to shit.
Fuck.
Yeah. So but that's the thing. Like Apocrypha was in the area. So you had a bunch of really good expansions with Apocrypha. After that, you had Tyrannus, which was the PI one that you said was crap.
All right,
but
so
then there was Incursion. No, but you're right. No, but they expanded. They did the Cosmos missions, which was kind of a flop. Apocrypha was like that kept the game going for a while, and then they had 3 or 4 really bad ones in a row that I think when they finally hit Incarna, it was like, wow, this is gone off the rails. And that's when the microtransaction happened. That was Summer of Rage. That was when a lot of players were like, why are we still doing this?
Yeah.
But the good thing with Incarna was once they realized that they messed up, I think one of the most important expansions, I think Citadel's number 1, but I think Crucible, which came out after Incarna, was also one of the most important ones, because what did they do? They said, we're not going to add anything new. We're just going to fix broken things. And I remember one of my very best friends, and we'll talk about our connections at the end of the show, one of my very best friends in Nominate would love to tell the story about Incarna and Mittens going up, and they had the CSM fighting and Summer of Rage and Burn Jita and all the stuff that happened for the player base was unhappy with the way CCP was doing things. But then we got Crucible, and they just spent an entire thing fixing everything that was busted. And they added new battle cruisers, added new ships, they fixed broken things, and that was kind of like, okay, CCP understands now. Like, you don't need to keep adding stuff to bring new players in. How about you do something that benefits the folks that are here? And I think that was started, in reality, that was kind of when that golden age period was, say, between 2011 and 2015, when EVE was at its absolute highest, where we were in the 60s and 70,000 players a day range. That's when that was at its heyday. And I think it was because of things like that. But I think all those stuff led into it.
Well, yeah, certainly from like a company and meta development point of view. I mean, not so much Odyssey, that was like the start of it, but Odyssey was already in production, or pretty far along in production before CCP could really course correct after Incarna.
Yep.
But like the eras of CSM 6, 7, 8, and 9, those terms were hugely impactful for how CCP thought about building the game and creating what would go into an expansion, or how frequently they put out updates, whether they were big expansions or little patches. It's hard to imagine now, but back in the Crucible era, the pre-Crucible era, you would get a winter and a summer, and really not a lot in between. Maybe a bug fix if you were lucky, but there really wasn't like a mid-expansion patch or a balance pass or anything like that. We had to fight really hard as players to get them to agree to do things like that. They just wouldn't balance ships. Maybe they would redesign a whole class during an expansion, but there was no tuning in between. So you would go with these really long swings of certain ships being incredibly dominant, certain fighting styles being incredibly dominant, and it led to long periods of things being very static. You didn't have, I'm not saying like things are perfect now, but think of the last fight you've been in where there was more than two fleets on the field. Chances are you saw like a faction battleship fleet, a Tech 3 fleet, a Ferox fleet, probably a couple assault frigate fleets running around trying to kill some stuff. Forget that. It was the meta ship, maybe its counter, if its counter was any good, or more than likely just another opposing fleet of the same ship smacking each other back and forth. And that was the game for years.
And that was, I think, one of the hard parts was the philosophy that CCP had back in those days, as Alec mentioned, about how they handled expansions. And it wasn't just the timing, it was also, there was this belief back then that you needed to have what we called a Jesus feature in every single one of these expansions. There needs to be one big thing. That, this is the new big thing. That is the anchor of the expansion. And what Crucible did was it said, we don't have to have one of these Jesus features. If we just do enough little things that players are asking for, they're going to be happy with it. And I think we've seen a mixture of that over the years since then. And CCP has kind of, sometimes they figure it out, sometimes they don't. And the one thing that I think, if you want to look at the history of the company in addition to the history of the game, you have to realize the CCP of 2025 is not the CCP of 1998, and it's not the CCP of 2005 or 2010 or 2015. The company's constantly changing. Hilmar's the only guy that's got his 20-year sword over there. There's nobody else that's been there as long as him, and the vast majority of people, especially, this is the games industry. You do not stay in the same job for a huge amount of time, and the fact that there are people at CCP that have been there for 10 plus years, that I think is a thing that you have to look at and say, all right, this is a company that at least has figured out how to keep employees happy because they want to stay with this company for a long time. And what else that means is that essentially the company is constantly turning over, and you got new people, new leadership, new thoughts, new ideas coming and going. And the CCP of 2015 with CCP Seagull at the helm, all the stuff that she had put out there and promised and said was going to happen. Every time we hear the whole CCP said they'd never do this and then they did it, it's largely because the company that said they weren't going to do it was not the company that decided to do it 3 or 4 years later. They were completely different people. So that's something I think we have to remember, is that as we look back on the history of EVE, we look back on the corporations that come and go, we look at the people that come and go. You're just looking at the history of Noir and bouncing around and the different things, and Alec, the CEO, leaving and then coming back 2 years later. And I mean, the same thing has happened with the company. People come and go. This game is 23 years old now, almost 20, I guess 22 years old, almost 23 years old now. It is still thriving, and it's still changing every day. And the stuff that matters now, the stuff that it may not be the same thing that matters in 2 or 3 years. We don't know. That's part of the fun of this game.
One thing that's remained constant is the relationships that EVE builds over the years. And in fact, I think, again, a big difference of EVE now to when we first started. I mean, back in the day, you had, fierce, legitimate interpersonal beefs, hatreds, and not an exaggeration, of players. And now I think as FanFest became more accessible, as more player meetups happened around the world, that just kind of fell away, and you started to see these nullsec blocks, and instead of being engaged in legit forever wars where you could easily imagine them fighting or maybe even seriously hurting each other in person if they were ever to be in the same space, they started sharing Slacks, started sharing group chats with each other, meeting up IRL to get drinks. That is a foreign concept to EVE back in 2005. No way.
And it's funny that you say that, because I have to say, I heard many stories from the good old days, or the bad old days, depending on your perspective, about how some people would be like, I'm not going to FanFest. I'm not going to EVE Vegas. I'm not going to EVE Down Under. I'm not going to EVE London. And you'd ask, why aren't you going? Don't you want to go see other EVE players? They're like, no, because if I get to know the other guys, I may not hate them as much, and I might not want to fight them anymore. And that was a legitimate fear. And it's funny because I've never had that experience. I'll go and meet people and say, hey, how you doing? And talk to the Horde guys and talk to the guys I don't like and everything. And unless it's somebody who's like been an actual dick to me, for the most part, it's like, hey, this is these are the bad guys. We're gonna blow you up, but we'll see you on the battlefield, kind of thing. And it's fun. I don't need to have a hate boner for the guy on the other side of the screen to kill him. They can just be a bad guy. Like, I give Gobbins a lot of shit. I like him. He and I have hung out in real life. He's a good dude.
He's a great dude.
Yeah.
Lave, who jumps out to you, like people or a group of people over the years that you've connected with? Don't say all of Noir. See the answer coming up in your face.
I mean, there were friends of mine from the corporation before Noir who I still game with, still see on Steam, still have contacts to this date, which is crazy. Now I've been playing EVE for 17 years, and that means I've known people kind of up from the internet from the age of 15 for 15 years now, effectively. I met the MC guys, a great bunch of people to meet. Of course, I've met some of the Noir people, but I think there's been a number of people throughout my kind of time in EVE who I've met, who form relationships with, who have kind of gained with. You kind of like to hang around. You're not going on a fleet. You need a wingman. That's the person you're going to go to. If you need a scepter, you need someone who's really good at tackling. That's your person itself. And I think going back to what Brisc and you were saying earlier about the fact that previously in EVE you could develop some serious grudges and real enmity towards people, partly because a lot of people who play now are just so much older and wiser, and we're just like, it is literally just a video game. When EVE was in the first 10 years, internet spaceships was indeed very serious business, and nowadays it's very much. I think it somewhat reflects back into why we're so quiet in Nullsec. It's a bit of a cold war. Everyone's just happy chugging away, got assets. Everyone's great. There's no real reason to kind of develop massive rivalries right now. So, yeah, I've met people from my time in EVE, and it has been a real defining moment of my gaming career to do so. Real development for mine, and yeah. I hope to continue it. And I hope it continues on, and I hope that the community keeps going. I hope that CCP cultivate an environment that allows more of this stuff to happen, and also cultivates an environment that allows more of us to go to war and blow up each other's spaceships, because that's really what we want to do.
It's really hard to rage form in European time zone when I need to get an afternoon nap. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing this.
Amazing what happens when you have kids and you have a family, and so it's rather difficult to do fleets at a particular time, because that's great. I need to put the little one to bed first, and I can't seem to get...
That's a window, though. In a couple of years, you can have them mine for you while you PvP, and then EVE will come back into a renaissance. Zero, what about you? Who are the IRL relationships that really jump out at you that you've made over the years?
I could make a long list of people, and present company would be included in that list of people, some that I've met in real life, and for various reasons I've made connections with. But I think the thing I would talk about now is something that it surprised me when I started getting into EVE, how so many people I've made friendships with in EVE do a similar job to the job I do in real life. And for me, that's the medical profession, right? So somehow all of these medical people that I've met in the game, somehow I've made connections with these people. Sometimes we've just all come together in one group and found out later that we're all in the same kind of job. It's just very strange, and I found that it's a similar thing for other groups. Sometimes I come across a group and they're in a similar position. Perhaps they're all in the fire service, or they're all former soldiers, or they're other sort of quite serious jobs. There's a lot of people that do serious jobs and then play EVE, and whether they connect with other people that do serious jobs at the same time, like I do, I don't know, but it's definitely been my experience. So I definitely want to shout out all those people that are in the medical field and play EVE online. What a crazy bunch we are.
Brisc, you have a relatively unique... Oh, sorry. I was going to comment real quick. Brisc, you've got a pretty unique career. I was wondering, have you ever met anyone in your profession that's also played?
Oh, yeah. It's funny.
You have?
I have. You guys are going to love this. So So for those of you who don't know, I'm a lobbyist in real life. I am a legislative director for one of the major maritime labor unions, and we're a member of the AFL-CIO. And we have every Monday morning we have a legislative directors meeting where everybody gets together and we talk about what's going to happen during the week. And I walked out of that meeting one day, and I was walking to get a cup of coffee, and one of the guys that I'm buddies with, who also is a legislative director for a major union, pulls me aside and he's like, "Hey, Brisc." And I was like, "What?" Because he said Brisc. He didn't say my real name. He said Brisc. He's like, "I'm a wormholer, by the way." And I couldn't believe it. I about lost my shit because I was like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah, I watch the Meta Show. You guys are hilarious." And it was funny. And I was like, "How have you never told me about this? I mean, we've been sitting here next to each other for years." He's like, "Yeah, I play sometimes, but I just got back into it again. And then I thought I would come and say hi because it's funny." But yeah, it's weird to me how often that kind of random stuff will happen to you. But yes, there are people in Washington politics who do play EVE Online, and they tend to find me and give me a hard time about it. Now, to answer your question about like connections, let me tell you mine, because I'd say my best friend in the world right now is Merkel Chen, who I served on the CSM with. We do the Rampage Incorporated stream. He's been on the Meta Show a million times. He and I talk almost every day. We've hung out in real life multiple times. I've got the code to his house. I can get in anytime I want if I go over there. He's been to my house. I've been to his house. I've spent time there. We've vacationed as families, my family and his family together, going to do stuff. Like, that relationship has been critical. And then in addition, Merc and myself, the third member of our triumvirate was always an Ominate. And I spent a ton of time with Nom Nom over the years. We got to know each other. We started on CSM 13 together. That's how Merc and Nom and I got to be buddies. And we were inseparable for a long time until last year when Nom passed away of colon cancer at age 41. And that was a rough patch. And I think that some of the highs in this game are the relationships that you make, and then some of the lows are going to be when you lose those relationships. So losing Nom in August was rough. But Mark and I got through it because we still were together. And I think that's the one thing we laugh about what's the best ship in EVE? Oh, it's the friendship, but it's a joke, but it's true. Like, the friendships that you make in this game are real. This may be an internet game. It may be spaceships. There may be people on the other side of the screen you don't like or anything like that, but they are real people. And when you get to know them outside of the game, you can build some of the best relationships you might have in the world. And that's certainly been my experience.
Yeah, that was rough losing an Ominate. And also, I mean, we can't mention it without talking about Vile Rat. I didn't get to know him very well.
I mean, if you think about the players that we've lost, the big name players that we've lost over the years, I mean, Vile Rat obviously probably the biggest name. Nom, Hateless. I mean, there's just so many people that we've all gotten to know over the years that have passed on while they've been playing EVE, and it's crazy. CCP Blaze, I mean, a bunch of other folks that we've known. That's what happens when you play a game that's 23 years old. EVE Online is old enough to drink in every country in the world, and that's, when you play a game that long, you're going to lose people, and it never gets any easier. But at the same time, we all get to know each other. We all get to talk and build relationships and have a good time, and that's what the game is all about.
I think you also see a lot of this on Reddit. Sometimes you've come across players, not like big hitters, not like big FCs, but just, you hear about my buddies, he's passed away, she's passed away, her family's lost that. The community comes round without fail, without exception. If there's a vigil, it is observed, it is dealt with. The line, battle lines get dropped. Everyone is in the same ship at that time. And as you say, the game's been going around for so long. A lot of us here, we've been around these blocks so many times. We know it's going to happen, but I think that's a real strength for the community, that when the community needs to pull together like that for the friendship to be there for the people who need to broadcast for reps, they do so. And I think that is a real bonus, a real boon, a real strength of our community.
Something that always strikes me as well is when often somebody will pass away unexpectedly, and their family, their close family, one of the first things they'll do is let their friends in EVE Online know. And it's incredible to think, like, if any one of us were to unexpectedly not be here, that somebody in our household would jump on our computer and type away in Discord and say, hey, so these people they've never spoken to, perhaps they only heard about, yeah, sorry, your friend is, in that deep moment of grief as well, of course. And it really still surprises me to this day how often that will happen.
Absolutely.
Brisc, what about you? You said a nominate was probably your most standout IRL, and
Nam and Mark would be the two guys for the most part. I mean, these are the guys that I'm in Karma Fleet because of them. I'm in Goons now because of them. I probably would have stayed in it if I hadn't played with them. But I wouldn't be where I am in the game now if it wasn't for those guys.
I'm gonna have to do a bit of a cop out for mine. Saying I yelled at Leif for not doing this before. Not everyone in Noir, although it's loosely true. But I will say, anyone that I've promoted to director in Noir, I've had the opportunity to work with really closely. I think most of them, well, I mean, some of the European ones actually, present company included, I have met IRL. I've met quite a few others IRL too in various occasions. And gotten really
I
close
have hung
to them.
out with Alec. It has happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We'll get you in Noir someday, Brisc.
Yeah.
The strands of fate draw you ever closer.
It's good to at least somebody wants me. I'll take it.
When you're ready to rob everything Karma Fleet has not nailed down, come talk to me. Yeah, I've met I think McCreary was my first director that I ever met IRL, and prior to him there was Taram Kaldar, who I haven't met in person, but I talked with a ton. He was my first director, period. And he was the only other person besides Delator that I've ever given the CEO chair to. When I had to study abroad in Germany, I was not going to be able to play for months at a time. So I said, well, I don't want the Corp to die. I can't CEO it. Taram, it's got to be you. Can you keep the wheels on the cart for a couple months till I get back? And I'm like hoping and praying he doesn't steal the thing. I'm like, well, I don't really have a choice, so I might as well risk it. He's a great guy. I've actually reconnected with him over the past couple of years too when we did the Noir relaunch. He's running his own corp, Royal Blackwatch Highlanders. It's another great corp out there. I hope to meet him someday. I don't know if I ever will get to, but... And then Delator, we didn't live too far from each other for a little while, so I wound up seeing him IRL quite a bit. Yeah, I got to know him and his family. They're awesome. Shout out to Night Flyer, who I live pretty close to right now. He's not a director, but he could have been if he hung around. And yeah, those are the names that really jump out to me. Like people that I've gotten super close to. If you become a director in Noir, like you are given an immense amount of trust. I have to like really believe you can do it, or have no other choice. One of the two. Luckily, people that I've picked because I had no other choice wound up doing pretty well. So.
Do you tell them that? Do you say, by the way, I didn't really want you for this job, but I didn't really have a choice?
I never phrase it like that. There's no one else who could step up like you could right now.
There you go. That's how you do it. There. Little brown nosing never hurt anybody.
I should also say I never made Noir director. I think I came closer, so I think I disappeared before it ever seemed to happen. And these days I'm so inactive that I just kind of skirt under the radar.
Didn't I manage to make you a director briefly, and then you went AFK? And then when you came back, it was on pain of not being a director was the only reason you came back. I'm pretty sure that's how it went down.
That's the smart play. That's the smart play. I'll come back, but you can't give me space work. Not doing it.
I was like, all right, well, you still FC from time to time? They was like, yeah. All right, great. You're in.
I remember the first time I tried to do something as a director in Noir. I'd never seen the interface around corp management and administration. And I was tasked with buying some, POS tower gantry things and the ingredients to make them work. And I bought them in Jita. And I couldn't find them, so I bought them again, and I still couldn't find them. And in the end, I realised where they were going. The corporation hangar. And by that point, I'd already bought them again with my own ISK, and it was a complete mess. And then I used the wrong wallet.
Zero, why did you spend our SRP money on 6 large bosses?
At least you didn't spend your own money. I've done that before. I thought I was reimbursing somebody from the corp, and I was doing it from my own wallet. I'm like, I guess I got to pay myself back now. Yeah, they don't make the corp interface does not make life easy for anybody.
Oh yeah, in fact, I don't know what they were smoking in Noir after I left. Lave, you would have a heart attack if you saw the corp interface with the role management. I don't know who messed with that, whether it was Dell or he delegated to somebody and that person was dyslexic, but our roles are like all over the fucking place. And I don't know what they all do. So I can only give people the member role.
Scared to touch them.
Yeah, because they're like tied to all these weird hanger settings that I don't understand. I'm like, all right, member. I know member works. And that's really the only one we need. So there's like 20 other different roles. I have no fucking clue what they do. They're not labeled or documented in any sensible way. And it's just a fucking spider web. And I don't want to stick my hand in it. It was an absolute mess. Luckily, we don't have like complicated industry stuff to do. We're really screwed. Well, thank you for joining us, listeners. This was episode 300. I really appreciate you walking down memory lane with us. I don't know how long you've been listening, but however long it's been, I really appreciate it. If you like the stories you've heard here, and you'd like to give Noir a try, and see if you can be part of the next time we do this for episode 500, 600, we'll see. And whatever area you joined in, whether you want to join Noir Academy or Noir proper, if you're a fan of the show, we'd like to talk to you. Give it a go. And, find out if this is the piece of Eve that you've been missing your whole life. You'll find a link to Discord in the show notes of this episode, whether you're listening to it on the website or Spotify or YouTube or wherever. And we hope to hear from you. And wherever you are, however long you've been listening to us, good hunting.